Just to recap what happened, on a TV interview recently, Representative Todd Akin, who's a Republican from Missouri, was talking about rape exceptions with abortion. And he basically said if it's legitimate rape, that was his first mistake, calling it legitimate rape, then, and now here comes his second mistake, then the female body has ways to try and shut that whole thing down. So what do you guys think he meant when he said the female body has ways to try and shut that whole thing down?
So it turns out that Akin's an acolyte of this guy, Dr. John C. Wilkie, who is sort of a, crackpot of a doctor who was the president of the National Rights to Life Committee. And he sort of spread the myth that this was a thing. The New York Times quoted him saying, this is Wilkie, "This is a traumatic thing. She's, shall we say, she's uptight. She's frightened, tight, and so on. And sperm, if deposited in her vagina, are less likely to be able to fertilize. The tubes are spastic." So,
I love this theory. Like, I am also really uptight and yet incredibly fertile.
The tubes are spastic. I don't even know what that means, but
this does not give it any credence whatsoever, or his belief in it any credence. But Todd Akin is not the only person who believes this.
Not by a long shot.
Which makes it much scarier. He didn't misspeak. It wasn't
Although
a
he's
gaffe.
now saying he did. He
is saying that, but I am not buying that.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not.
We'll get into more of that later because that taps into the question of what legitimate rape is and what's consensual rape, which is another term that conservatives use. But before we completely shut that one down, is there any legitimate biological research about stress and the ability to get pregnant? Like in pregnancy books, they're always telling you, relax, don't be stressed out. When you're stressed out, it's really hard to get pregnant. I mean, that's like completely standard in the how to get pregnant literature. And so is there any, biological support for this? Is completely 100% crackpot crazy. Obviously, you can get pregnant if you're stressed out or raped because many, many thousands of people have.
I don't know all the research, but I think that being a stressed out person, having stress in your life that leads to heart disease or, stress has like many medical implications, but I don't think that that's not the same thing as like actually, stopping the sperm from fertilizing.
Well, and stress is different from trauma.
Now, I guess this leads us to the question of why conservatives play around with the term rape, right? Because they want it to be as limited as possible. Like it's become socially unacceptable to be a conservative who doesn't believe in the rape exception, or at least they're ambivalent.
No, that's not true, actually. What was so socially unacceptable about what Todd Akin said was the part about, the body will shut it down. But many Republicans do not believe in rape exceptions. It is not unacceptable. It's part of their platform.
Erin Carmone at Salon had actually a really good piece on this. She said, I think it's more intellectually honest for people who are pro-life to not believe in a rape exception because it's sort of saying, it's like either you believe in a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy or you don't, And
either you believe that this thing inside at any stage is a person and then killing it is murder or you don't.
Right.
I agree with that.
I totally agree with that. And the rape exception, which you're seeing in the Hyde Amendment already, in order to get federal funding for abortions, it only applies for cases of rape and incest. That just opens up such a can of worms. And then we're back to what is legitimate rape and what is not. And then, the question of proving rape is always a really tough one. And it just seems like a headache that is not what we need added to this debate at all.
And legitimate rape is just another code word for forcible rape, which is frequently used in conservative circles. So the outrage to Akin seems much more tied to A, his embarrassing ignorance of science, and B, I think the party's concern about the women's vote.
I want to get to the women's vote in a minute, but isn't that what this is revealing is the crazy tortured position the Republicans have gotten themselves into over the rape exception? So you guys are right. And I think Erin is absolutely right. It's not intellectually consistent. What's intellectually consistent is to believe in the death penalty for abortion doctors and also to have no exceptions at all. Because obviously murder is a higher order crime than rape. And so if you think it's murder, it's just murder.
And on the pro-choice, and what's intellectually consistent is to not make exceptions in our mind for sex selection abortion or for, that all of these things that seem morally questionable to a lot of pro-choice advocates, we can't draw those lines either.
Right, exactly. That seems fair. But I guess the question for me is, haven't the conservatives just then gotten themselves in further trouble? Because the one single victory or language victory that the pro-choice side has won over the last 10, 15 years is this rape exception, is keep forcing that down people's throats. It's like Bill Clinton used to use this. Almost every candidate has used this as the moral line. You can't possibly think that it's okay to deny abortion to someone who's been raped. So the Republicans have have been forced to take on that position. And then over the last 10 years, they've come up with this ridiculous language, which has gotten them in ever more trouble, where they're trying to decide what's legitimate rape and what's consensual rape. But my question is, doesn't this come off of like the whole date rape era? Isn't this where this is coming from? I mean, why is what he's saying largely different from, say, what Katie Roiphe said in her book about date rape?
Yes.
Probably. And I think people were pretty unhappy with Katie Roiphe's argument back then, too. She didn't make the same biological argument, but it sort of stoked the same anger in people, right?
Right, that rape is just rape. I mean, I noticed when Shauna Pruitt, which I wrote about in Double X Factor in XO Jane, she is a woman who confessed to having had a baby after rape, which I haven't really seen before. Very few women have done that. And she wrote about her conflicted feelings around that. She very pointedly did not describe what happened to her. Exactly what the rape looked like or what happened, because I think she probably has gone down this road before and been subject to the same scrutiny. Like, well, what were you doing? Was he your boyfriend? You know, was it date rape or was it really rape? And so I thought it was an incredibly smart decision on her part not to reveal what actually happened to her.
One point that I thought Erin made that was also very good was that the pro-choice movement, in an effort to make conservatives sympathize with women who want to have abortions, have focused on this rape and incest exception, even when that is not the common reason for women having abortions. It's a more sympathetic reason. It's a reason that that many Republicans can be okay with. But in that, there's a problem. I think it's giving their side a lot more ammunition and a lot more leeway to say, well, okay, fine with that stuff, but not with regular abortions.
Yeah, it's like the perfect victim problem. Again, you can't just want to have an abortion for certain reasons. It has to be for this specific reason, and it can't just be rape. It has to be like
bad rape.
Bad rape.
And anyway, imagine what like a weird, sick world that leads to. Like if you can imagine a state which only has a rape exception, you know, what you'll have is a lot of young women claiming that they were raped, you know, and then people doubting whether they were raped or not. And then it just creates a really like an air of sort of suspicion and awfulness around.
Our own Amanda Marcotte wrote a piece yesterday entitled "Rape Exceptions Don't Work," and a lot of Latin American countries ban abortion except for these exceptions. But these exceptions are ignored, or there's such a climate of intimidation that doctors are scared to perform the abortions. And there are many, many stories of young women who have been raped or have been victims of incest in Latin American countries that can't get the exception.
Yeah, the question of what this would look like in practical terms is a sort of terrifying one. And I want to read one more quote from Wilkie, the doctor, because this is like a stunning thing. Someone asked him, you know, if you get your way, we're going to go back to illegal abortions. And he goes, this time around, illegal abortions will be considerably safer than they were. People who do them have had a great deal of experience. Like the logic inherent in that is just nuts.
Yeah.
Like
I was just going to say, it's almost as if they want to create a wink, wink, nod, nod situation. Like they want to be living in a country in which abortion is illegal, but they kind of want to have it both ways. So they want to create this little hole, and they want to, you know, they want it to be okay to sort of climb through this little hole if you need to.
I'm just wondering if you guys actually have a real fear that there's a threat to abortion rights, or do you think a lot of this is political season stuff?
You know, I'm amazed every political season. I grew up in a post Roe v. Wade era. I take abortion for granted. And every political season am surprised anew by the vehemence with which people would like to eliminate abortion. I mean, it's true that the national polls show that to be an unpopular move, that largely the nation has stayed steadily in favor of first-term abortion, you know, in the majority for a very, very, very long time. You know, for maybe 40 or 50 years, that's been the steady American majority. And yet there is this very strong political push to have it illegal. So, you know, because they're so vehement, it never dies. It doesn't go away. It doesn't wax and wane the way some other culture war issues. I mean, you see gay rights wanes, right? You feel like that movement against gay marriage is sort of lost, or they're losing. You have a clear sense they're losing, but you don't feel that way about abortion. Like they never seem to be losing. No, they always seem to have the same vigor that they had 20 years ago.
I've just been surprised by how much like hatred there is surrounding it this time in particular. And maybe I'm just a little more attuned to it. And, you know, Twitter sort of unearths things more quickly and throws them in your face more quickly. But I don't think that there's an actual existential threat to it. But it's sort of like radicalizing me. And I think of myself as a pretty moderate person. And I'm like ready to, you know, climb on the barriers. I'm pretty upset.
Now, here's the caveat to that. This Akin thing has revealed that the Republican Party will only go so far with this issue. I mean, that's the surprise that came out here. I don't want to talk too much about the politics, but the ABC News clip talked about how important the gender gap is for Republicans and how interested they are in winning the women's vote. And there's been a lot of pre-convention press about how Mitt Romney wants to portray himself as very warm and a family man and appeal more to women. And it seems like they immediately, instantaneously backed off this one. Like they did not give him a second. It was like 1 second before Karl Rove cut off his funding. It's like they recognized very, very quickly that even Republican women were not going to be on board with this one. And maybe that's some kind of progress. Maybe that shows that people like Akin are seriously not in the mainstream. It like allies him more with the whack job, profit and not with the mainstream Republican Party.
I don't necessarily think it shows that he's not in the mainstream. I think it shows that they desperately want to win the White House. They're willing to sacrifice the majority in the Senate in order to do so by taking his funding and support away.
I think it shows they're not sure what the mainstream is anymore. There are people who are supposedly the adults running the shop, but then it's getting splintered in a way that is scary even to them. He's not falling in line. He's not doing what's good for the party. And that's probably frightening for them.